Is Rhett Lashlee among young coaches the best in the country? And that puts him in some elite names. Find out next here on Locked On SMU.
You are Locked On SMU, your daily podcast on the SMU Mustangs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Wednesday edition of Locked On SMU here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day and appreciate you spending a part of your day with me. I'm Grayson Singleton, and today's episode, by the way, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now on FanDuel, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel right now and start picking. We'll tell you more about them later on in the show. Speaking of later on in the show, this one prominent college football analyst thinks there is a regression coming for SMU and that it's almost inevitable for the Mustangs. So we're going to talk about that. And also we'll continue our dive through the position rooms as we talk about the wide receiver room heading into 2025. Again, my name is Grayson Singleton. Glad you are with us here on Locked On SMU on a Wednesday. Okay, so Rhett Lashlee. We spent a lot of this off-season in the lifespan of this show that has now reached about 10 days, talking about Kevin Jennings and talking about the guys that Scott Simmons has coming back for him or guys that Casey Woods has coming back for him. But what about the offensive coordinator predecessor to Casey Woods, who is now the head man, Rhett Lashlee? Where do we view him in the national scope of coaches? Well, I happened to stumble across this article on ESPN.com from Bill Connolly, and it's a very, very strange one. So I'm going to do my best here to really delve into what the process is that led to what we could think about Rhett Lashlee, not just now, but after next season. So Bill Connolly uses this SP Plus advanced metric that basically assesses a coach's performance against what could reasonably expected with him. The goal of this metric is to reward coaches who would achieve more than what you thought versus coaches that are just achieving in the schools that are college football royalty. So think of guys like Kalen DeBoer at Alabama or Dabo Swinney at Clemson, who we'll get back to in a second, or those other types of schools. Brian Kelly coaching at LSU, Sarkisian at Texas. So how good does a coach do versus what you would think they would based on the school that they're coaching at? Now, the article from Bill Connolly uses the word overachievement a lot. I'm going to stay away from that word. I'm going to try not to use the word overachieve because I don't believe what SMU has done has been a result of overachieving, because to me that implies a lot of too much of luck. And I don't believe that's apropos when it comes to the rise and the recent success of SMU. So where does Rhett Lashlee rank in this? Well, first, let's figure out exactly what's going on. Let's define our terms, so to speak. So SP Plus takes into account a cumulative average of how you did versus a baseline, and that's how you get the rating. So basically, instead of it being a cumulative career thing like, say, WAR is in baseball, which still nobody really knows what it means, this is an average of over your years. And because Rhett Lashlee is such a small sample size, Bill Connolly limited the piece of this article that has something to do with him to coaches who have coached 1 to 3 years at their current institution. So coaches that fall into this category: Deion Sanders would fall into this category. Spencer Danielson at Boise State would fall into this category. Fran Brown at Syracuse would fall into this category. Mike Elko at Texas A&M, Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning, G.J. Kinney at Texas State, and Kirk Cignetti are some of the big names that would fall into this category of people that have been at their current institution for 1 to 3 years. Okay. Rhett Lashlee, according to this advanced metric, with a rating of 16.8, puts him number 1 amongst coaches who have been at their current institution 1 to 3 years. As a matter of fact, let's zoom out, because you can actually take that average and pit it against other coaches across college football. Where does his average rank? His 16.8 average, get this, is second amongst active D1 head coaches. Only Kirby Smart's at Georgia is higher. As a matter of fact, he ranks slightly ahead of Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, who is ahead of Curt Cignetti at Indiana, who, if you understood what I just laid out there, that would make a lot of sense. Brian Odom is behind him, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, and then Ryan Day, the reigning defending national champion head coach at Ohio State. So what does this all necessarily mean? Well, number one, you can jump to the conclusion that, okay, Rhett Lashlee is really good at doing more with less. Okay, fine. I get that. And especially if you take recruiting into account prior to the 2025 class, you probably are onto something there. But to me, it says that Rhett Lashlee is just plain and simple a top coach. Now, if you want to back up, Rhett Lashlee didn't take this program out of the dirt. That didn't happen. Sonny Dykes was at SMU, and he pretty much stabilized the program. Okay, cool. But now here's where Rhett Lashlee's tenure so far becomes that much more impressive. Because two things could have happened here. A, SMU could have just stayed in the American Conference and stayed pretty good, maybe compete for a championship there. The second thing could have happened is that SMU makes the jump to the ACC and completely falls on its face, flatlines, isn't competitive, even in a year like 2024 where Florida State was abysmal. But that didn't happen. Neither of those two happened, actually. Not only did Rhett Lashlee take over a stabilized program, remember he worked under Dykes as Sonny Dykes' offensive coordinator. Not only did he take over a program that had seemingly got its legs back underneath it for the first time in 3 decades, he ascended it. And that's what this metric is pointing out, is that sure, there was a baseline where you could perform pretty well, but what happened last year caught everybody by surprise. And with the way Lashlee has worked with his coordinators, the way he has evolved as a football coach and as an offensive mind, and as well in recruiting, what is going to show here is that Rhett Lashlee could be considered a top 15 coach in all of college football, especially if he's able to duplicate what happened in 2024. So yesterday we talked about the quarterback, but today we're talking about the head coach, which I think in modern football, if you get excellent head coach and excellent quarterback, you're almost automatically going to succeed at a very high level, given how today's brand of football in college football or the NFL works. So Rhett Lashlee has proven that no matter what you give him, no matter what set of circumstances he's come in, he is an elevator of a program. He's an elevator of talent. He is an elevator of a staff. That's what that says, and that's what SMU has at their head coach. Now, you want an example of somebody who may, and I will use this word, underachieve. Go back to Dabo Swinney, because I told you we'd get back to Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney's performance rating has taken a steep decline. Now, this advanced metric is something that's going to back up what you've already seen with your eyes. Because ever since Trevor Lawrence, Clemson hasn't really looked like Clemson. There's been a considerable drop-off from the Tigers. Now, whether that's Dabo's resistance to NIL or his early refusal to use the transfer portal that has culpability in that, you can encompass all of that into the fact that Clemson just doesn't resemble the same Clemson that was winning natties with Deshaun Watson and with Trevor Lawrence and competing with them with Kelly Bryant at quarterback and beforehand with Tosh Boyd. So Dabo, as a matter of fact, his rating has dropped ever since it peaked in 2018 with over 20. In 2019, it was 21. In 2020, it dropped below 20 to 18. And then in 2021, it took its most precipitous drop all the way to 6. And then it's continued to drop until it baselined in 2023 before rebounding in 2024 just a little bit. But basically what this is saying is that Dabo Swinney, when you pit him against what should be expected with him being at Clemson, which he's got to get credit for being Clemson's most high-profile coach and leading Clemson to its most high-profile era in quite some time. He does get credit for that, but still, Clemson. Against expectations, Dabo Swinney has basically done what he's supposed to do, if not in recent years, dropped off and fallen short of that. Rhett Lashlee, on the other hand, in terms of coaches who are early in their tenure, is number one. It puts him ahead of a dude who just played for a national championship in Marcus Freeman, a dude who was the number one for weeks running in 2024 in Dan Lanning, maybe the most high-profile celebrity coach in the entire sport, Deion Sanders, one of the most up-and-coming celebrity coaches in Fran Brown, who I love but is as boisterous as ever, and over a guy who also made the college football playoff last year in Spencer Danielson at Boise State. And what's curious about all of this, as it pertains to Rhett Lashlee, is this. He's going to need to be that elevator. He's going to need to be able to be that elevator talent, that mastermind of a ship that handles a staff, because that schedule gets daunting this year. We forget that SMU did not have to play Clemson, Miami, or Syracuse in the regular year. They will this year. And because of that, SMU is going to need to see the Rhett Lashlee that got him to the top of that list. And we'll talk about that more on the other side. Stick with us here on Locked On SMU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game that much more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling and give you the possibility to win some more money? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are over here getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions every day. And they're so fun to use, by the way. It's such a fun way to bet, and it's easy to track your bets as well. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel. Open that FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Locked On SMU. I'm Grayson Singleton. Again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can be alerted to all of our new premieres whenever they happen. Our new shows will premiere every day at 1 p.m. Central Time, so make sure you're on the lookout for that on YouTube. And by the way, check out the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. So we talked about Rhett Lashlee and what has made him such a unique coach up until this point in his tenure at SMU, his third year as a college football head coach in the first place. His brilliance as a head coach is going to be much needed this year. Josh Pate of CBS Sports, one of the better people at talking college football in the country, in my estimation, was asked which teams could he see a drop-off in among teams that made the college football playoff. So last year, 6 teams made their debut in the college football playoff. Tennessee, Penn State, Indiana, Boise State, SMU, and Arizona State all made the playoffs for the first time. His answer? Well, it's easily the Mustangs for him. This is what Josh Pate had to say on the Josh Pate Show. 11-1 last year? You've got to go worse. We're asking what's more likely. It's far more likely that they're worse. They've got a tougher schedule this year than they did last year. We were talking about them as a prime sleeper contender merely because of their schedule. We almost named them that sight unseen because of how fortuitous their schedule set up last year. He also went on to mention that they lose 3 of the 4 leading wide receivers, which we'll talk about in a second, in addition to the schedule being that much tougher. As a matter of fact, Athlon Sports' Kyle Wood, I found this, has SMU schedule as the 7th toughest in the conference. Now, let's talk about that last part first, because I think the last part is interesting. If SMU's schedule is the 7th toughest in the ACC, I'm kind of cool with it. Because I think the ACC, the ACC is very top heavy. You've got the big 3 going into the year, which I think are Clemson, Miami, and SMU, in whichever order you put them. I don't think there is really any considerable argument against it, except if you have Clemson at 3. I think that's a little bit much. But outside of them, Louisville should be there. I think Louisville can be good. Obviously, Syracuse. Syracuse, I think, is going to be a really good team. I think Syracuse is the 4th team in the ACC. And then after that, you kind of really don't know. And the thing that makes the ACC really weird is that we don't know what the hell to do with Florida State. So given all that, and given that if you think SMU has the 7th best schedule in the conference for a team that I think is a consensus top 3 team in the conference heading into the season, I think you should be okay. But let's talk about this schedule for a second. So Josh Pate says, we thought they were a sleeper sight unseen just because of their schedule. We were talking about them as a prime contender merely because of their schedule. Okay, fine. The schedule got tougher, but did SMU get that much worse? That's the question I have here, is that did they get worse? Because let's see what let's talk about what SMU has coming back. Head coach is back. Check. Cool. It is being underrated that both coordinators are back. Because when a team like SMU, who has been a perpetual mid-major for the longest time, gets all of a sudden onto some hot streak, those coordinators are typically purged from. They typically will go to a bigger school as an elevated coordinator job. Think about what Ben Arbuckle did at Washington State, and now he's the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. That's the first example that comes to mind. Or they end up getting a head coaching job somewhere, right? Well, that's not the case here. Both coordinators are back. The quarterback who took over after the start of the season was not projected to be QB1. He is now in the midst of an offseason where he is the unquestioned QB1. That means something. RJ Maryland is coming back. You mentioned SMU loses 3 of its top 4 wide receiving targets. That's true, but you're also getting one back from injury. And then we saw how good Matthew Hibner can be in RJ Maryland's absence. Also, guys like Jordan Hudson are going to be elevating, and Ronello Brinson are going to be elevating. And you brought in another receiver who we'll talk about in the next segment, who I think you should be really excited about. Defensively, there could be a drop-off. There could be a drop-off defensively because you lose guys like Kobe and guys like Ahmad at your linebacker positions. Okay, I get why you can be concerned there, but you bring in Zakai Barker, and then you've got other dudes who are on the come up through the ranks of the depth chart. I think you'll be okay. Not to mention, you've got 2 good edge rushers coming back, along with Isaiah Wokobia and the back end of that defense. So my question to Josh Pate is, did SMU really get that much worse? Because sure, the schedule got tougher, but you have to think about the schedule getting tougher within the context of the conference. Now, you add Baylor to the schedule. Okay, that might be a potential pitfall. But you get TCU. I think you'll beat TCU. Look, as long as SMU gets through the Miami game with 1 loss, which I think is a highly possible scenario, given that they don't have to go to New York. I think we should probably underscore that. They do not have to go up to Syracuse, New York, and they get Miami at home. To me, that means something. So the fact that you get those 2 at home, sure, you have to go on the road to Clemson. Okay, fine. That's a tough task. It still makes it very likely that you can get through the Miami game, which after that, you've got a trip to Boston College, you're home for Louisville, and you go to California. Those are 3 winnable games, especially Louisville would be the one you probably had the most concern about. But again, you get that in DFW. So the schedule shakes out pretty well if you can get through the first 9 games with 1 loss, which is highly possible. By the way, they would have put together a hell of a resume if you get through those first 9 games with 1 loss. So I think SMU is cool here. Now, do they have to go out and prove it? Absolutely. Do I think Rhett Lashlee has to demonstrate that for a second year in a row, I am a national championship contending coach and a coach of that quality that can get a team to that pedestal? Absolutely. He's got to prove it. They've got stuff to prove. Don't get me wrong. But I think the ingredients are there to where if they do fall off with 1 additional loss, they'll be just fine. So sure, if you want to go by technicality of the question, is it more likely that they end up worse than 11-1 than they are better than 11-1, which would mean 12-0? I guess. But is there some steep regression that I can forecast, barring injury, to the point where they're knocked out of the college football playoff picture? No, I don't think that one bit. They could be 10-2, win the ACC championship game, and I think they are back where they ended up last year. Rhett Lashlee's got to demonstrate his brilliance. Rhett Lashlee has to have another season that puts him at the top of that list that we talked about in the first segment. But I think SMU can be more than fine. I don't think there's some steep regression impending here. And one of the reasons some people would think there is an impending regression is because of the wide receiver room. And let's talk about that to close up shop. One more segment here to go. Locked On SMU. I'm Grayson Singleton. Again, make sure to like this page, like this video, leave some comments below. I go back through them later on in the evening, and I'd like to interact with you guys. Hit me on Twitter, Gray_Singleton2. It is right there at the bottom of your screen. So Gray_Singleton2 is where you can find me on Twitter. Okay, let's continue our deep dive into all the position rooms, and let's talk about who the hell Kevin Jennings is going to be throwing the ball to. And we talked about the tight end, and the tight end is going to factor into this conversation a little bit, even though we talked about the tight end, I believe, on Monday, if we didn't on last Friday. But let's talk about wide receiver. And the first thing we need to start out with is something that Josh Pate pointed out in our last segment, is that they're losing a bunch of dudes. So leading receiver, Roger Daniels, gone. Second leading receiver from last year, Keyshawn Smith, gone. Third leading receiver was Jordan Hudson. He's back. Fourth leading receiver, Moochie Dixon. He's gone. But after that, Matthew Hibner, R.J. Maryland, Brashard Smith, gone. Jake Bailey, I believe he's back. Yes, he is. He's back. And then comes the wild card in all of this. Yamir Knight, who they brought in via the transfer portal from James Madison. Yamir Knight is probably not a name that a lot of people that follow SMU very closely are familiar with. You're also probably not going to get very excited about a 5'8", 180-pound dude from Smyrna, Delaware. That probably won't excite you. But this 5'8" dude caught 53 balls last year for the Dukes for 605 yards and 4 touchdowns. His long included a 68-yarder, which I think came against Old Dominion, where he literally ran through the entire Old Dominion defense. Now, again, you're going to say it's the Monarchs of Old Dominion, and I'm not going to fight you over that. I'm just not going to do that. But Yamir Knight, I think, he's a shifty dude who is also fast. This dude can run. And there are a lot of Power 4 schools that have dudes that have the exact archetype that Yamir Knight falls into, play a huge, substantial role for them. And I think Yamir Knight coming over is going to have that sort of ability. I think Yamir Knight is going to have sort of ability where he's going to be a dude that can create so much separation. I don't know if there's any former football players, especially former defensive backs out there that used to play football that are watching this show. But I'm willing to bet that there's a decent amount of you that are either listening or watching that remember playing backyard football or playing in the park or in the street or whatever, and you had to cover that dude who was 5 foot barely. And you couldn't stand in front of him. And I think that's what Yamir Knight is going to bring. Now, outside of Yamir Knight, who I think is going to be an intriguing addition to this team, you've got to do like Jordan Hudson, who is the leading returning receiver on this team. I think Jordan Hudson's due for a big year. And throughout the lifespan of this show, this has been a theme I come back to. I put a lot of emphasis on dudes who are in second and third years in the program. And Jordan Hudson fits that. Romello Brinson fits that. He didn't work at Miami. He took on a little role, small role last year. I think he's due for a bigger role this year. I think he's talented. Both of these dudes are talented. And then here's the other thing that you can count on in college football that I think, especially when you recruit well. You can sometimes count on a sophomore or a freshman stepping in a big way. look for a dude like Grayson Singleton to factor in at some point. Grayson Singleton, Jalen Cooper. Now, both have been projected second, and emphasis on the word projected. As second on SMU's depth chart. I don't know where they end up factoring in, but I think they could potentially be ready. And I'm trying to pull up right now the recruiting class from the 2025 class. Grayson Singleton is a 4-star. He is a 4-star according to On3 Rivals, 5'10", 165 pounds when he was coming out of DeSoto. I'm not sure what he's listed at now, but he had the elite tag given to him by Rivals. Jalen Cooper, 6'1", out of Cibolo Steel, also has the elite tag, 4-star wide receiver. So that's a pair of 4-star wide receivers, 4-star elite wide receivers, and elite blue chipper prospects that landed with SMU. So don't discount those dudes either. But at least with what you have going at the top with Jordan Hudson, and then the addition of Ymir Knight and Romello Brinson. Romello Brinson, keep this in mind, this is going to be a dude who he once was at Miami. So you think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder trying to validate how he got to Miami in the first place? I think so. And then come the Titans, because RJ Maryland's expected to come back healthy and whole, and we have figured out what we have in Matthew Hibner. That kind of sounds like a promising receiving core, albeit everybody taking a step up. And remember, before you start scoffing at tight ends, there have been successful programs where the tight end is the first or second leading receiver. Georgia won back-to-back natties with Brock Bowers. Now, are either Maryland or Hibner Brock Bowers? No, they're probably not even an approximation of Brock Bowers. But the value of tight end, we talked about this a couple days ago, cannot be underscored if you have a really good one, because that's what could really raise the ceiling of your offense. Tyler Warren, who, again, Maryland and Hibner might not be an approximation of, but his quality tight end play raised the ceiling of Penn State's offense. Colson Loveland was a big part of Michigan's offense. So if you can get quality tight end play to factor in with all these receivers who are going to be learning new positions and new roles and new hierarchies on the depth chart, I think your passing game should be just fine. You should be able to attack downfield on the outside, downfield in the middle, short game. A guy like Ymir Knight, make plays after the catch, move the chains. Comparing him to a guy like, here's a name for you, Cole Beasley, former SMU wide receiver who went on to star with the Dallas Cowboys. A guy that can just get open and move the chains and keep a drive alive. They've got the ingredients. They've got the pieces. And if this wide receiver core doesn't fall off, I think our theme of our show is I think SMU is going to be just fine in terms of its quest to get back to the ACC championship game and ultimately the college football playoff. Maybe even win a game. All right, that'll do it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On SMU here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making us your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Portal Show with Brian Smith. He's got all the latest on the portal comings and goings, NIL deals, and what have you. So be sure to be the most informed fan and check out Locked On the Portal on our YouTube page. My name is Grayson Singleton. We will talk to you tomorrow here on Locked On SMU. Take it easy, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.